What did we learn yesterday?
We used components in state.
We used components. What did we learn about components? What's the primary purpose of a component? Let's start there.
So that can be reused like an element.
Yep. It is basically unlocking a new level of HTML for us, right? So we know what a P tag is. We know what an H1 tag is. We've written our HTML before, but we've always kind of been restricted to saying, hey, this is something built into HTML. So what our component does is allow us to take a block of HTML. It doesn't just necessarily need to be one line. Oftentimes it's multiple. It's a chunk of HTML, and we're able to move that into a component along with some other React features in order to be able to reuse that component over and over again. And we're certainly going to see a lot more components in our upcoming project, our chat project. What else did we learn? You mentioned state. What do we use state for? What's kind of special about state?
It can't be changed, but since it can't be changed directly, whenever it's updated, we can update the page or do something else.
Exactly. So far, what we have seen is in our JavaScript, we've made a variable, right? And that variable has some value in it. But whenever we update that variable, we have to use inner HTML, right? We have to say, hey, this is over on the JavaScript side, please stick this into our HTML document dot whatever, right? In React, because we are already blurring the lines between our JavaScript and our HTML, we can do that as well with a variable. But it can't just be any kind of variable, right? It's got to be this special use state variable. So that starts out with a value, and we use that value in our JSX syntax. And then whenever we want to update that value, we use our set state, right? We say, okay, this is set whatever our variable name is. And when we do set that in, it's going to automatically re-render our HTML for us and only update the parts that we need. And so we will definitely get a little bit more practice with that in our chat app. But basically what we want to be thinking about is this variable something the user is going to see? Does this variable contain user data that needs to update? And if the answer to that is yes, then chances are we need a new state variable in order to pull all of that off. There are very few times in React that we want to do document dot anything, get element by ID, dot inner HTML, any of that. React tends to have a method themselves for updating that directly. And so that's what we lean into a little bit, right? We don't need to do a dot on click because we can attach a function using our JSX syntax right into that element. We don't need to do .inner HTML because we can write out our return function to use a variable in state. So we'll get a little bit more practice with that coming up. What else did we learn yesterday? Anything we want to review? We are going to go back kind of through what we built yesterday, make sure we understand the flow of all of that. But anything else from yesterday that we want to touch on before we dive in today?
We learned about the difference between props and keys and dot map and what that function does.
Yeah, so what do we use props for?
To pass some kind of value in.
Yeah, so props are a lot like parameters and arguments, right? The reusable components are great, but oftentimes we want to change a piece of that component based off of whatever we use when we call it. And so what props allow us to do is pass information in from where we call the function or the component, with the information we need, and then we can access those props via a parameter inside that component. We also saw .map, which was a different kind of a for loop, essentially. We're looping over items, but we use that .map whenever we say, hey, we've got an array or we've got a list of things that we would like to loop over and make this component show up for every time, every item inside that list. So think about your map as a way to take the input, that raw data, and kind of map out what component should show up for each item in that list, right? And that's why we call it a map, because we're taking some input and mapping that to the output that should show up. And then we also touched on key. Key is another prop in React. Except it's a special kind of prop, right? It's a prop that React uses under the hood to keep track of all of those components in the list. So it's basically a way for React to know, hey, if one item changes in that list, we are able to update that specific component instead of having to update all the components that came out of that list.
So would that be what we did on yesterday? Would that be the, sorry, let me just pull it up really quick.
Yesterday, it would have been the key with the index.
Is this the one that I want? Yes, okay, perfect.
So what we did yesterday is we added this key equals index, and we got access to that index from the map function. In general, using indexes are not necessarily a good idea. Multiple reasons for that, but basically, if you remove a task from that list, React now needs to go back through and re-render any task after it because the indexes for those tasks would have been updated. So in general, it's better to use some kind of unique identifier. Index is kind of the easiest one for us to reach for. But as we get into full stack, we will find that when we get a list of data from our database, the database needs to keep track of all of those items as well. So the database will be generating a unique ID that we'll be able to use for the key down the road. But for now, this is a fine way to make React make that warning go away and say, hey, the key is going to be based off of the index.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Anything else from yesterday we want to touch on? We are going to do a quick run through of all of this code, make sure we understand the flow of it, make sure we understand everything that's going on in our app.js before we really dive in and build our first real web app. I guess the blog counts as a real web app, but we are going to build an entire chat interface over the next 2 days, be able to send messages, be able to have received messages show up, make sure we understand how our state is flowing. We're going to use multiple components, and we're going to learn about different files. If you thought having only 1 or 2 files for HTML and JavaScript was fun before, wait until we get into today. But before that, any other questions I can answer before we do a quick review of yesterday's code? Okay, so yesterday's code largely all lives in this app.js file, right? We didn't necessarily move anything out of this app.js. We created our to-do list. And I cannot stand it when people start with a code review in the code, because to me, I'm like, well, what are we doing here, right? It's very hard for us as a human to think about what this code is doing without the context of what the code output is. So what I like to do is I'm going to right click, and you guys don't have to follow along on this. We're going to be firing up a new project in a second. But I think it's a good way to kind of refresh where we're at. So anyway, I like to start by running npm start. And I want to see what the final output is, right? How does the user interact with this? Because oftentimes when you start at a new company, you won't be working on a new project from scratch. You're going to be working on some existing code that other developers on your team have written. And one of my favorite interview questions is, you just got handed a brand new project. How would you go about adding a new feature to it? And my answer to that is always get it running, make sure I'm in a little playground environment where I can't impact other users. And once I have that up and running, then I start diving into the code and making sure I understand what's being asked of me, what the end user needs to do, and all of that stuff. So we've got a pretty basic app here. We've got a little text input, and we've got this button, add task. And when we click in there, we are able to type something in, like task 1. We hit the add task button, and it shows up on the list here. And we can come into task 1 and, of course, add a task 2 and click the button and see all of that output. Okay, pretty basic, but, you know, we kind of get that flow. So let's pull apart everything that React is doing in order to make all of that work. So I'm going to come over to my code here. And I'm glad it can all fit on the screen. I apologize if this drawing gets a little messy, but where we start is not anything up here. It's actually going to be all the way down in our return, because these functions here don't get run until we tell the browser to run them. So what we do is we start out with our form and we say on submit. We haven't submitted anything yet. Don't worry about that. Okay, here's the input type text that I saw. Here's our button to add the task. And here is some UL, right? Unordered list. Those are our bullet points. And what's it doing? It's mapping over the tasks. Well, where are my tasks coming from? My tasks are coming from my use state up here. What does my use state start out as? That's what's going to be in those parentheses. My use state starts out with an empty array. Well, what's that telling us? That's telling us our tasks are just an empty array to get started. So we come back down here to the map and we're like, you know what? This whole thing isn't going to run because there are no tasks inside my list. We're going to loop over all 0 items in that list. Okay, well, looping over 0 means it's not going to loop over anything. So when I start up my npm start, when I fire it up, when I tell the browser, hey, browser, here's some React code I would like you to run, the only thing we really care about to get started is our form. Now, the first user action is not clicking the submit button and adding an item to the task. What's the first user interaction we have with our page other than the initial page load?
Text input?
Text input. We've got our input showing up here, but we've got to handle 2 things. In React, we made this a controlled input. A controlled input means it's got an on change and it's got a value. In other words, a controlled input is any input that is hooked up to React state. We hooked that up to React state because what we wanted to do is say, anytime a user does this thing, update the information, the data that we have, and also display it to the user. Excuse me. So we started that by saying our value is going to equal new task. Where is new task coming from? That is coming from our use state up here. Well, just like our tasks use state, we set it to an initial starting value. That initial starting value was an empty string. The reason we did that is the browsers do not like starting out value at null. Browsers prefer to have an empty string to start at, and that kind of makes sense, right? Of when I start typing something in, it's going to be a string, and so that's why React likes, the browsers like to start that value out as an empty string here. Okay, so we've got our value, we wired that up to state, but now we've got to tell the browser, what do we do? How do we update that state? So we do this on change event and we wire that up to our text updated. Text updated is a function right up here that we ignored up until this point. So now we've got an on change event. We've seen on-change events before. In our movie theater, we had the drop down. In our weather app, we did an on-change. We've seen on-changes before, right? That's just vanilla JavaScript. What isn't vanilla JavaScript is the ability to hook up that function right to the function up here that it's defined in. So what we do is we get access to the event. We've seen events before, and we pull out the target of the event. That's going to be this input down here. We extract out the value of that target, right? We want to know what has been typed into that. And we take that whole event target value and set it in to our new task. Where does our set new task comes from? That comes from our use state here. Well, Max, why can't we just say new task is equal to event target value? Well, that breaks the rule of state. State, this new task, or even our array of tasks, cannot be modified or updated or edited directly. That means it is what is called an immutable value, a value that cannot be changed. What else have we kind of learned in regular JavaScript to declare an immutable value or variable?
Const.
Const, right? And funny enough, we get access to const here, right? We are saying, hey, new task according to the laws of React, we need to follow the rules of React and not update that variable. So what we do instead is we use this set new task function that we get access to right alongside the variable itself. And what we do is the only parameter we ever pass set new task or set any new variable into state is going to be updating the value of new task. Now, React says, hold up, you're updating state. Before we do anything else, we know that whenever we update state, we need to update wherever that variable in our return is used. That means that on change, anytime a letter is typed into this input, we are going to go run this function, which is going to take the event, grab the value from outside of it, and set it into our state, which is going to come up here and not only update that value into new task, it is going to take whenever new task is used and drop that value in down here. Okay, we follow a very similar approach for when this form is submitted. When we hit the submit button, go up to the on submit and go run this function called form submitted. Where's our form submitted? That's up here. However, we run into a problem. We can event and we can prevent default. We've seen prevent default before. That prevents the whole page from refreshing. We're telling the browser, hey, we've got this under control. We want to handle what happens when that form is submitted. But what we run into is our tasks are sitting up here, but in an array, we've always added an item to the end of the array by pushing it before. However, pushing modifies the original array that we're trying to add the item onto. That breaks another rule of React, right? We cannot modify state directly. We need to modify it using the set function. So in fact, that's what we do. We use set, but set is going to override whatever current value is in that state variable with whatever the new variable we're passing into it is. Well, we know we want our new task, which is actually coming from all of the work we just did right here. New task is going up and getting the variable from state, which we have updated with the text updated here. So new task here isn't anything new for us. That is essentially going down and getting the input from our text right here. Okay, if all of that's the case, we got the new task. And now we don't want to overwrite all of the existing tasks that exist, right? When we add a new task, we don't want to take task 1 and 2 that have already been added and get rid of them. We want to add in task number 3 at the end of task 1 and 2. So in fact, that's what we do. We declare a new array right here that not only includes our new task, which is flowing all the way through this input. What we also do is we take the current copy of tasks that is coming from our state and we spread it out into our new array right here. In other words, we say take all the existing tasks and spread them out into our new array that also includes our new task, then set it into our tasks. Any questions on any of that so far? We're almost at the finish line.
And just really quick, after the spread adds the new task, is it basically like a push? Does it get added to the end or the beginning?
It gets added to the end, but the kind of cool thing about a spread is that if we wanted it to get added to the beginning, we could literally just move it over to here. So
Very cool.
basically, if we did tasks without this spread operator, we would have our string of the new task, and then we would have another array with all the old tasks inside of it. And so what that spread operator is doing is it's saying, no, take all the items inside this array and dump them out into the new array. So in other words, we always have just one array of strings. If we didn't have this spread operator, we wouldn't be able to take all the items inside the array and dump them out. We would be taking that whole existing array and putting it into a new array. And you know what? This is a totally, if you wanted your items sorted by the newest tasks on top and the oldest tasks on the bottom, this would be perfectly valid code. So depending on how you want your task list to be sorted, you could totally move that around and flip it if you wanted to.
It's good to know. Thanks.
Okay, so we set our tasks in. We've got one final thing we've got to do. Whenever we set our tasks, we have now updated our use state, which means our tasks value is now updated. Our new tasks array has everything in it that we're looking for. So we come down here and we say, wait a second, we use our tasks in our return. Now that you have updated it, you need to go loop over each one of them. Okay, what do? We get access to each individual task. Now, what information would we like to show up for each task? We would like a new LI, a new list item to show up. That list item is going to use a prop called key, which is going to be based off of the index right here. And what else do we want to show up inside that list item? I would like the text of the task, which is coming from our tasks, which is coming from our state, which is getting updated from the form submitted based off of the task that got typed into the input down here. That wasn't as ugly as I thought it was going to be. The ugly green is gone. I like the pretty blue now. Okay, how are we feeling about all of this? Obviously, we're not asking you guys to make this all from scratch on your own. And what we're going to do is kind of ease into the chat application tonight. We are going to build out our user interface the way that we want, and then we're going to get a little practice breaking things out into their own components. We're going to learn a more advanced React concept that you guys are bound to run into, which is called state hoisting. And we're going to learn how we can pass state around from component to component by using a prop. That's all coming down the pipeline. But if we don't understand this, we are guaranteed to get lost in anything in the chat app tonight. So let's take a step back. Is there any part of this file that you would like me to recover?
So we, okay, I wrote some things down and maybe I'm not correct in saying this, but so we start in the return section.
Mhm.
We build the form,
Mhm.
okay. After the form, we build the input with the button, the on submit. Yep, input and then button.
Yep.
After that, we complete the UL
Mhm.
and then we task it with .map, tasks.map
Mhm.
that loops, sorry. Yep, it's mapping over the tasks. And then after that, we go to const tasks
Mhm.
and set tasks with an empty
Array.
array.
Yep.
Okay. So the value is the new tasks. The function, this is where I'm lost. Oh, okay, so const, yep, that's where I'm lost.
Okay. So all we do when we first load this page is we
Mhm.
go up to the tasks from our state and say that is an empty array. There's nothing inside of it. So we don't really have to do anything in this return.
Okay,
So we're done for now.
Okay.
This UL has nothing inside of it because there are no list items to loop over to display. So
okay,
at this point, we take a load off and we say, hey, until the user interacts with this page, we're done. We've rendered everything out. Nothing is updating. There are no state changes. We're done. We showed you the form, the input, the button, and an empty UL because there are no list items inside of it.
okay,
From there, we go, all right, the user now ran this on change. They changed the input.
which means typing something.
Typing something, yes. Literally on change of they pushed a letter, that letter made the input change. What would
Okay.
you like us to do with that change?
Okay,
That we say text updated. All this function is
Okay.
doing is syncing in whatever they typed in, the target value they typed in, set that in to state, which is coming from set new task right here.
okay,
Now that we've updated state, whenever we update state, we need to take wherever we use new task, come back
And
down
type it.
to our return and see our new task is now updated with the new value that they typed in.
Okay, so unchange sets up the const text update
Mhm.
as the event with the target value. And then the set new update comes from the const up top and it trickles down to the button,
You got it. To the input.
to the input. Okay, gotcha. Okay,
Then the last flow we've got to trace through, right, is we've got our button type submit. When you either hit the enter button on your keyboard or you click this submit button, it's going to submit the form. Our
Wait.
form submitted is tied to our function up here.
Okay,
Our function up here is going to stop the form from refreshing. It's then going to take a copy of all of the current tasks that is in state and
Okay.
spread them out into a new array that
Okay.
includes all the existing tasks and whatever our new task is, which is coming from the state, which is linked to the input down here.
Okay,
So all we're doing is we're making a new array that includes whatever the value is that got typed in to the input with all the existing ones, and we're setting that into our set
set
tasks.
disk. Okay, so
Now,
whatever you put in, sorry, so whatever you put in, and I'm trying to visualize it with the page itself. So whatever you put in stays on the page and then the new task comes right underneath it.
yes,
And that's what that is allowing you to do.
correct. Now,
Okay.
the new task doesn't show up quite
And-
yet. We've updated it in state, but
Mhm.
because we updated set tasks, that means wherever we use tasks down here needs to rerun.
Okay,
And so because of that, we now loop over each one of the tasks with our map, and that is what generates out the the li. So you
So
can
the list.
the
Okay.
list. So you can think about this as kind of our joint generated HTML with an inner HTML document get element by ID equals that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. Okay. Thank you. That makes it a little bit clearer because I can visualize step by step. Okay, thank you.
Now,
I
React
hope
is a
that
little,
helps other
Re-
people as well.
for sure. And React is a little weird because there are certain things that always rerun whenever something is set, like the parts of this return. So it's not really clear to us, like, when does this use state run? Does that use state run every time something new is returned? Or does it run only when we set it? Or like, what's going on there, right? So that's why I like to take a step back and think about this as, what does React care about? React cares about what it needs to render out to the user. So everything up here in this component is all about keeping track of things under the hood. What always ends up getting sent to the end user is whatever is in our return down here. So you can kind of think about this. This is all of our JavaScript stuff that we've done before. That's our script.js. That's making it all interactive. And everything in here is our index.html, right? That's what actually gets displayed to the end user. The only difference is we can slip in some pesky JavaScript and use things like our value and our on change to link into information from the top of our JavaScript. Archel, go ahead.
All right, I have a weird question. So whenever the button is clicked and the tasks get updated
Mhm.
and it shows the previous, I guess, list, if you will,
Mhm.
is it the tasks.map that keeps the previous one on the screen, or is that something else, or we don't have to worry about that? Because
So
something you said made me think that's what it was doing.
split it into two things.
Okay.
Think about think about the blog posts. What we did is we had 3 blog posts, and those blog posts were stored in an array. And what we did is we said, let generated HTML equal an empty string, go over each one of the blog posts and make that blog post show up. But we did that on the home page. That is what's going on down here. That is what is saying, go over each one of the blog posts, go over each one of the tasks, and what I would like you to show for each one of them is a list item. But if you think about our blog post page, we not only had the home page, we also had a blog post editor, right? Where you could hit new and write in a new blog post. But when you hit that save button or the add post button or the, whatever it was, we had to go save that information somewhere. We had to go update the array of all of the blog posts to add the new one in. So that's what we're doing right here. We're taking the new blog post, we're taking the new task, and we're adding it to the list of all the existing tasks, and then taking that combined value and setting it in to that value. So once we do that, because it's a set, use state goes, whoa, wherever tasks is used needs to go get updated, and it goes down and it reruns the code down here. But you want to draw a line, right? This is really a 3-step process. 4-step process. 1, they typed something into the input. 2, they submitted the input. 3, we updated all of the tasks to include the new tasks. And 4, we figured out based off of the new tasks what needs to show up for each one of them.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, my handwriting is as bad as in person as it is when I try and draw on a trackpad. Certainly not a doctor, but I can write just like one.
All right. You definitely clarified it a little bit more for me. Thank you, Max.
No problem. The good news is the steps are the same. The bad news is we start adding more and more of those steps. So what it's really important to do is break it down, because this is 35 lines of code that we just broke down into 4 steps. And we can understand all 35 lines of code because we can identify those steps. And you'll notice those steps are not in order, right? The order that we wrote this code made total sense to us. When we did all of this yesterday, we were like, well, we got to get an input to show up. All right, well, now the button's got to submit somewhere. Okay, well, now that the button's submitted somewhere, where are we going to store that? Okay, now that it's stored, what do we show up for all of those items in storage, right? But while we did that in order, and that made total sense when we were writing it, now that we're reviewing this code, it's like, I don't know what any 35 of these lines do. So breaking it down to that level and saying what 4 things are happening here, let's literally put that giant number 1 on it. Let's make sure that we can know what that flow is. Yes, when this form is submitting, it's doing all of the stuff with spreading the array and adding the new thing in. But if we can sum that down, if we can summarize that to user type something in, the form gets submitted, we deal with the data in the form, we make that form item show up, that makes it much easier for us to understand the entire flow here. If you thought drawing on your code was important before, wait until we get into React, because we are going to create a chat app tonight. And every time we layer on another user interaction, we start to realize that, hey, this one file is getting really big. Wouldn't it be nice if we could split those files out into their own components, and those components will be responsible for keeping track of the information inside of them? And that's how we get to our clean code. That's how we get to our dry code. Don't repeat yourselves. So we get a little bit more practice tonight of saying, how do we make our own components and make them respond from there? All right, that's all I have for you tonight. Good night. Just kidding. Whole new project. Let's fire it up. Let's get our live share going. Gonna start at everyone's favorite spot, which is the terminal. Although tonight I am going to cheat. So I'm gonna pop open a new terminal. I'm gonna type in CD space. And instead of running about 14 gazillion commands to get all the way down into our week 13 folder, I'm instead going to pop open Finder and go to my desktop and my code and my week 13. I'm going to right click new folder and create my day 3. And inside from my day 3, I'm going to grab that and drag that right into my terminal. Very important that before you drag this into your terminal, you have CD space and that file path. If you do, when you hit enter, you should see your command line change to D3, and we can confirm that we're in the right folder by running a pwd. Or if you're old school and go, nah, I don't need a mouse, you can CD your way all the way down in through those folders with your ls, making sure that you get to the right spot. From there, we are going to npx. We are going to create React app, and we are going to call this chat. Now we talk about the weather and the single digit temperatures that are headed our way, and just wait for React to take its sweet time.
There's a snowstorm. So we're implementing a new system in the city for timekeeping, and Mel knows this because we work together. Anyways, so we were doing training, and they're like, "No, we have to go. We have to prepare for the snowstorm tomorrow." So they couldn't finish training.
It's good. I would rather them be, plowing my streets than keeping track of how much time it takes them to plow said streets. But I feel like that's got to be such a tough job because there's so much prediction that goes into it, and it's just, yeah. Anyway, I'm feeling really lazy tonight, so I'm going to take my chat folder, not my day 3 folder, my chat folder, and I'm going to drag that. I'm going to attempt to drag that right to my VS Code icon in my doc. If you don't have that item in your doc, pop open VS Code and then go File, Open Folder. You can open it traditionally, but we get a little bit faster at this, hopefully every time we open a new React project. I'm going to right-click and open in my integrated terminal. I'm going to npm run start, and I will fire off a live share for you guys in Slack. And I will also dump it in Zoom. Nope, that is certainly not what you guys wanted to see. Let me try that again. I don't even know where that came from. There we go. Jennifer, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Something weird came up on my terminal, so I had to clear it out and start again.
Okay.
Just trying to remember, is it npx?
Create-react-app.
Right
and
after
then
my D3?
the name of the app. Yes. So we change our working directory down to the folder we want to create the app in. Then we run pwd and make sure that we are in our day 3 folder. And then this is the command we run to create the React app.
There it goes. Thank you.
No problem. While it's doing that, you can move on to the next step, which is popping open the folder in VS Code. We can't run npm start until it's done creating everything, but it is safe to open the folder while it is running and creating all the files.
And we're just running Playground.
Running the new chat app.
Oh, yeah. Right. Thank you.
And if you have your spinning React logo, you are good to go and all caught up.
Hi, Max. I just logged in. I was able to make it into the class. So all you've done so far is just created the folder?
Yep. Perfect timing. We spent the first portion of class reviewing what we did yesterday. Tonight, all we've done for new stuff is CD down into our day 3 folder, make the day 3 folder, CD into it, and npx create React app chat. And then we popped it open in VS Code, open terminal, npm started, and that's it. Anyone need another minute? I know internet connections can make npx run slow. Not going to go too far ahead here.
Pardon me,
Hopefully,
Max?
yeah.
I'm sorry. It's npx create chat app.
React app space chat.
Wait, all right, hold on. I'm sorry, I'm extra slow today. All right, npx create. What's after create?
Dash React dash app and then
And
a
that's it.
space,
Oh,
and
space.
then the name of the app we want to create, which is going to be chat.
Okay.
And while it's running that, you can go to VS Code and pop open that chat folder that it created for you.
Okay, now it's working. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, inside our app, this is hopefully going to start to become muscle memory for you guys. We're going to delete out the entire header. We are going to delete out our logo.svg import all the way up at the top. And we are going to head to our app.css, and we're going to nuke everything in that file, but not the file itself. So just empty out our app.css, remove the import logo.svg, and then everything inside our app div, that whole header element, we're going to get rid of.
So we delete the header and the import on app.js, and then we go to app CSS,
Yep, and nuke that out.
everything.
Everything inside of it without deleting the file itself. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and the last setup step we really need before we start writing any of our own code, we are going to need Bootstrap for this because we are going to build this all using the grid system, right? So there are other ways of installing Bootstrap into our React project. We can actually install Bootstrap using NPM. However, there are pros and cons to every method of how we pull in Bootstrap, and I prefer to go old-fashioned and pull it in the way we already know to do that. So I'm going to head over to Get Bootstrap. I'm going to go to the docs up at the top of the page. I'm going to scroll down to our section here, and I believe we just need the link tag today. I do not think we'll need the script. So if you grab that link tag, we're going to head over to public and index.html. In general, we really shouldn't be modifying public because whatever we put in public will affect every single page of our React application. However, in this case, we want that, right? We want Bootstrap on all of our different components and React pages. So because of that, I'm going to just drop that in underneath all the meta tags. It doesn't really matter where it goes as long as it's somewhere in your head. You'll be good to go. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to my app.js, and I'm going to put in just like an H1 that says test. I come back over to my React app and I have the word test showing up. It is not in Times New Roman, so that means we are good to go and start creating. And I'm going to pause there because I know there were lots of steps in the way. If you got lost at any of them, please, please, please ask now how to get caught up because I do not want you behind for the rest of class.
Yeah.
Where did you drop in that link?
The link for Bootstrap, that is getbootstrap.com. Docs up at the top.
I got the link. I just need to know where to drop it.
Oh, drop it. Sorry. Public index.html anywhere inside the head without interrupting a current tag, obviously.
I'm sorry, which file? Index.js, app.js?
Index.html, which is up in our public folder.
Public folder. Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
So all of our React code is relegated to this SRC, which stands for source folder. Public is kind of what the React code gets dumped into. And so that's why it's in its own little directory here. If we put any React JavaScript code inside public, the browser would be like, I don't know what you're doing, man. Like React code goes in the source folder. But because we are modifying the page that the React code runs in, that's why we put it in public index.html.
Do you hear my dog?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay.
Zoom has great background noise suppression. They've invested a lot in that over the past couple years.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm sorry, and I missed which tag.
File,
Yeah, which file we're supposed to copy from the site.
public index.html. Inside here, we're going to add the new link tag that is coming from the link tag from Bootstrap, the same link tag we always use. And that's going in public index HTML in the link right here.
So Max, do we delete that original link that's in there?
No, we just add in a new link. We don't delete anything.
All right, so put it like above or below that one.
Yeah, anywhere in the head section is okay.
Okay.
Kalai, go ahead.
I'm not seeing anything in my day 3 folder. So none of the files are showing up in my day 3 folder.
Okay, share your screen so I can see your terminal and let's see what's going on. Okay, here's what's going on. In your terminal, let me request remote control. In your terminal over here, when you ran your okay, when you dropped that file path in here, when
Oh,
you
yeah.
said go down to day 3, you did not include the CD in front of it.
Okay.
So because of that, if we run a PWD, we can actually see you're in your users folder. That
Okay.
means that if we pop open our users folder, our home folder, we have, nope, not computer. You can see your chat app got created all the way up here. So we don't want that. So we're going to delete that out. Then we're going to come over back here. We're going to CD into your day 3 folder. Hopefully by dragging and dropping that. Okay. And I'm going to delete this NP file. I don't know how that got created. But
Yeah.
now if we do our npx create React app for our chat, it should create our chat folder over here, and you should be good to go in VS Code as well.
Sure, Max. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help? No, this is a lot of steps, but now we're ready to rock and roll. We've got Bootstrap in. We got our app.js all cleared out for us, ready to go. Does anyone else need help? Lots of steps to get going here, but now we get fun syntax.
Max, can you just check my screen just real quick just to make sure I'm where I need to be?
Yes, go for it. Sorry, I thought I
All
was screen sharing. I am not.
All right, thank you. All right. All right, so here is my app.js.
Yep. And let me
All
see
right.
your index.html.
I put the
And
link down here underneath the other link.
that's
Let's
good.
go.
And do you have your npm start going?
In the terminal?
You could do it there, or you can do it in an integrated terminal in VS Code, whichever you prefer.
Okay.
So right click on, oh, yep, that works too.
Oh, okay.
And you're going to do an npm space start and enter. And that's just going to fire up your localhost 3000 for you. Looks like you already have another thing running in the background, which is okay. Just click in your terminal and hit the Y key and then enter. I'm sorry, in the terminal in VS Code.
Oh, sorry.
And you should see your test H1 show up. Yep. The only thing you're missing is that centered. And that to me says you have not emptied your app.css out yet.
Okay.
So
I did.
everything in there, just Command A, delete. And save. And you're all caught up and good to go.
Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help? Remember how clunky it was when we first started VS Code and creating new folders and all of that? Don't worry, this is normal. I promise you it gets faster every time we do it. Get to the point where it will just naturally happen. You'll get your bootstrap in, you get all your files set up, but we are, I believe, good to dive in here. So let's see how much user interface we can create. So our app is going to be broken up into 3 sections, right? And we are basically, we don't have a mock-up or a wireframe for this, but think about any chat application you've ever seen. It's probably got some header at the top that says, you know, who the messages are with, or has some nav bar or something up there to kind of just anchor the whole page. Then the vast majority of the page, everything in the center of the page, is your whole message history, right? And you want to kind of be able to scroll up and down. And let's just really visualize that. What about that do we need to think through? Well, on the right side are usually the messages you have sent. And on the left side are all the messages you have received, right? Other people have sent to you. And if you think about that a little bit more, there's usually a little bubble or square around each one of the messages. And then even thinking a little more detailed there, usually the messages have the time that they were sent, right? Or some additional information about that message. And okay, let me think about that. That is what shows up on the right side, also shows up on the left side for any users that I've received, any messages I've received. And we think about that a little bit more for our styling. We really want to envision everything before we build it. Normally, the messages on the right are one color, and the messages on the left are another color. So we're saying, all right, we got that. Any other details that we need to think about in that main section? No, I think we're pretty good there. So what's left? Well, we got to be able to send a message, right? And so that's going to be at the very bottom of our screen. We're going to need some input down there. Okay, well, we also need something that they can click on to actually send the message. And then what's my user behavior going to be, right? Well, when I hit the send button, I want my input to clear out because I've already sent that message. And I want that message to show up in that list of all the messages. Then if we get fancy, we might have that darn CRUD come around again. Create, read, update, delete. Maybe we lean into that a little bit. Remind me to go over your homework assignment before the end of class. Maybe I'll do that when we get back from break. Totally forgot to do that. Okay, so let's start with our app header. So what I would like to do is everything inside my app, I want to put in a container, right? And the container, just like regular Bootstrap, we can come in here and just add in container. Now, you may have noticed, you know, Max, all of this HTML looks pretty similar to me. Does anyone see something a little different from regular HTML? What is it, Jennifer?
I defined it. Well, we can put a container right inside of the div without having to put a container at the top and then have our divs below that.
We
Yeah.
can do that in regular HTML. We can add
Mhm.
multiple classes to one div. Yes,
Well, we also have it in a function.
we do. But what about the HTML itself looks different from regular HTML? What in this div h1 and closing div tag looks different?
We don't have to have quotes. We don't have to have closing tags. I don't.
Yep,
No.
we've got a closing tag right here. We got a closing
Name
h1
instead of
here.
class.
Ah, class name. Wait a second. We've always done class equals. Why do we need class name equals all of a sudden? Well, it turns out that class is a reserved word in JavaScript. In other words, there are certain words in JavaScript that we need to be careful about using in our HTML. Imagine what havoc would happen if we just said const. Well, do we mean const as in we're defining a new variable? Or do we mean const as in we want that to show up in our HTML? Fortunately, there isn't a ton of overlap between JavaScript words and HTML words. But class is one of them. Class means a very special thing in JavaScript. We actually haven't used it and are not going to. However, an older version of React used classes very heavily. So React developers didn't want there to be any conflict between a class in our HTML that's referring to a CSS class and a class in JavaScript. So because of that, they said, hey, anytime that you mean to reference a CSS class, we're going to call that class name instead. There are very few things where that conflicts. The other place that conflicts is the style object. We're going to get to that in a second. That style, when we write styles, we're used to writing them as strings. However, React allows us to use an object instead, which adds another layer of flexibility and empowers us a bit. But I just wanted to call that out because as you guys now have muscle memory for typing your div class and whatever, what you will find is React's going to yell at you and it's going to say, hey, heads up, you said class equals here. We know what you meant, but you really should be using class name instead. And so that is why the first half of class is so hard for me, because whenever I'm teaching you guys HTML, if you go back and rewatch the videos, you will see me have the muscle memory of starting to type out class name and then realizing that we're not in React code. So that's something that you pick up on over time. Whenever we are in React, we should not have class. We should have class name instead. Okay, with all of that said, I'm going to hop back over to my code. My test is a little offset. You may have to expand your window out, but that's good, right? That's saying, hey, my container is working. So I'm going to get started here in my header. I'm going to create a header section. And inside my header, I would like to do a div class row. When I say div class, I mean class name. And inside that row, I'm going to have a column. And I would like inside that column for the text to be centered. And if that text is centered, I would like an H1 in there that says my messages. Come back over here. I've got this ugly test, and then I've got my messages up at the top. All right, well, that ugly test is going to bother me. Let's take out that H1 and save, and we come over here, and I've got my messages. Causing to repoll there. I know that wasn't complicated code, but there was a fair amount of it, so give you guys a second to catch up. This is a great exercise to follow along with me. So if you are finding that you're struggling with React, sometimes if you type along, you can unlock a new level of understanding because you're doing something physically with it, right? When you're typing it out, you're getting practice with that syntax. even if you don't understand the syntax or not following the concept, sometimes following along is actually going to be helpful because it makes you understand things that you didn't realize you were actually understood.
I'm sorry, so my message, is it in centered or is it in the container to the left?
It is centered in the container. So it's the container, which has a header, which has a row, which has a column that is centered and has the H1 inside of it.
I had missed the text center.
No problem. Good catch.
Sorry, I'm trying to play catch up. Give me 1 second.
The good news is we're only working in app.js so far. We haven't left any other files, so everything is right in there. All right, so we've got our header showing up. We're like, yeah, that's cool. Now we got to start working on our next section, right? So makes sense. Like always, I'm gonna put that in its own div, so we know that's separated out. And inside of that div, I am going to start making my first message, right? So my first message, let's make that something that I am receiving, right? So I am going to make a new div class row. And inside my row, I am going to make a div class col10. Because if we think about our messages are going to be on the left side, right? So I want everything on the left and then a little bit of room on the right. So my messages feel like they're on the left. And then when we have our messages coming in, I'm going to offset it by 2 and then have my messages kind of show up on the right side from there. So I've got my col10. And now I need to say something in my message, right? So I am going to create a span. And that is going to have a class of message text. And just in case I want to modify that a little bit more based off of what shows up on the left and what shows up on the right, I'm going to add another class on there called message text. And I'm going to say my first received message. And underneath that message, I would like there to be a timestamp. And that timestamp is just going to say, something like 12/21/22 at 6:43 p.m. So I come over here and I'm like, all right, it's showing up, but it doesn't look much like a chat app to me. It looks like 2 P tags and some stuff. Well, we have access to CSS, just like we have access to CSS in our HTML. Let's get a little fancy there. I'm going to split my screen here so you can still reference what I've typed in over here, because I know we've got what is looking like div soup. But let's start adding some styling to our messages. So I'm going to start by saying, hey, you know what? We've got a header up here, and it doesn't really feel like those are separated out. So on my header, I am going to add in a border on the bottom of it. That's going to be 1px solid. And I happen to know that CCC is a nice light gray, a nice hex color. And that's all split out now. And I'm like, okay, that's nice, but I don't really like it being right on the top there. I'd like a little bit more breathing room. So I'm going to throw in a margin on the top of that of 15 px. Okay, I'm feeling that. Now I want to style my message text, right? Feel like we're used to seeing a bubble around our messages. So let's focus in on that. I'm going to target my message text, and I'm going to throw my background in as blue. Yes, I'm an Apple fanboy. Messages should be blue. Okay, we come over here, and I see, that doesn't look good, but it is the blue that I wanted. First thing I notice, our text needs to change color. So let's make that white. I come over here and I've got my white text. I'm like, well, that's kind of cool, but I don't want to look like the text is highlighted. I want to make it feel like it's inside that blue. So I come over here and I add some padding of 10 px. Come over here. I'm like, all right, well, that's starting right, but now it's up too high. So I need to come over here and say, okay, what is containing all of my messages? Well, I don't really have that yet. So I'm going to add an ID in here called messages. And I'm going to come over here and target my messages and add a little margin on the top of them of 15 px. Okay, we're getting there. I'm almost done on this, and then I will take a breather. We're almost there. All I want to do is add a little border radius onto that of maybe 30 pixels. Now I got my little message bubble showing up. Feeling pretty good about that. I think just add, no, that's good. We can leave it there. I'm going to pull my padding down. No, I'll leave it there. We'll just take a breather. Most of our new code is in here. What I have learned from watching other people write CSS, there's this developer I work with on my team who's a front-end designer and developer. They write CSS in a way that is completely magic and wizardry to me. Like, I cannot understand how they can pump out CSS that quickly, that efficiently. So what I like to kind of talk through when I'm writing my CSS out is, what am I going for? Because if you try to make a message text bubble, you're like, oh, I know what they normally look like. But break those design elements down, and that's what makes it easier to figure out what CSS properties you want to target, right? The first thing when I think about that message bubble showing up on my phone, the first thing I see is it's blue. So that's what I add in first. Then I go look at it and I go, well, my text has got to be white. I can't read that. And then I add that in. Then I say, well, it looks like it's highlighted. If that bubble were a little bit bigger, it wouldn't look like it was, highlighted text. So I add in my padding. Then I go, well, I don't want it to look square. I don't want this to look like other, WhatsApp. I want this to look like, a rounded little bubble. And so that's how I add in my border radius. And pretty quickly, you can see over here that formed into a message bubble pretty quickly, right? Those 4 lines of CSS transformed the look of this to actually feel like a message bubble. Now my timestamp is really ugly. I really want to fix that. So I'm going to throw 2 more lines in here, 3 more lines in here. My timestamp should be a color, let's say dark gray, right? We don't really need that popping off the page. And let's try and shrink that down a little bit. So go down to 10 px and come over here. All right, that's looking better. I don't love that it's on top of my bubble. So let's just throw, I'm going to bump this down to let's say 7 pixels. And then my timestamp, maybe I can add in a little margin on the top of that of 5px. All right, I like that. No, CSS is boring, but important process in all of this, right? Because as a full stack developer, doesn't matter how great your functionality is, unless you can make it pretty and displayable to the end user. You won't get too far. So good to feel comfortable in your CSS. You don't need to love it. If you do love it, great. You might become a front end developer after this, but important to have all aspects of it going on. All right, we're gonna do one more element and then we will stop for break. We've got our received message going on. That's great, but I would like to start with this as my base and also make a message as if I sent it. So I'm gonna copy this whole row. And before I do that, I'm in div soup here, right? I'm losing track of what div goes to what. So I'm gonna click on my div here and it's gonna highlight my closing div for my row. So I'm gonna leave myself a message that says end of row, just so I know where I'm at, right? So I'm saying, all right, this div lines up with this div down here. I can take that whole section, copy and paste it. And if that works, I should have a second copy of my message. Okay, but I don't want this to be a received message. I want this to be a sent message. Well, if that's the case, I probably need to be able to differentiate between what's sent and what's received. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, we're going to take advantage of this user message text. If it is a sent message, the user hasn't typed that in. So I'm going to delete that class out from there. But down here, the user sent that message, right? So we want to style that a little bit differently. So I'm going to say, hey, my user message text is going to override the background blue and instead is going to make the background light gray. No, light. Oh, come on. Light gray. So I come over here. Okay. But white doesn't look good on light gray. So I'm going to change that color to black. We are cascading over our color and our background set up here while still taking advantage of the padding and border radius on both of those messages. Okay. Now I want that over on the right side, right? I want my messages that I receive over on the right. So I'm actually going to put a call to inside my row because I don't want anything inside that area, right? If they write a really long message, I want them to not go into that call to spacing. Same for this one over here. Only go 10 across. If you don't need all 10, that's fine. But I want this to be anchored over on the right. It's almost like I want to text align right that. In fact, I can pull that off. I don't know how I pulled that off. I throw a text end in here, and that shoots my message over to the right. What? I'm
No,
not cheating and
quick-
using code from last year. What are you talking about?
Quick question about the, so I understand what you did with the, starting with the call to before the received message so that it prevents it from there. Now, would we in practice put a call to after the call 10 for the messages that we send?
You don't need it because there's nothing
Oh,
else
right,
going
right.
into that row.
That's right. Okay. It's just, it's implied that it's a call to there. Okay.
Well, it's not really a call to there. It's that this can't get any bigger than a 10. So that 2 isn't really required. That's just empty space over there. But we need the empty space here before this 10 starts, which is why we put the call to here. With that said, you could put an empty call 2 after that call 10, and it would work exactly the same.
Okay. Thank you.
So my messages are both great.
Okay.
Is there
So
a step that I missed?
yes, over here, we've got a message text
Mm-hmm.
and a message text and a user message text. This one up here should not have the class user message text on it.
Okay, so the bottom one shouldn't have
The bottom one
oh,
should have
okay.
it. The top one should not.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. We are taking a breather here. If your HTML looks like this, you can go on break. We will be on break until 7:20. I will stick around for the next 4 minutes in case anyone has questions.
Yeah, Max, I'm just trying to figure out, you copied that whole first class name row div.
You
Or
got it.
just, yeah, okay. Underneath div ID messages.
Mhm.
Okay.
So just make sure if you click on this first div, it will highlight in gray where the closing div tag is. That's going to help you make sure that you're getting the right divs without too many or too few of them.
What's the pain? How do I get the dictionary to stop popping up?
I can help you with that. If you go to Apple up in the top and drop down, do you have system settings or system preferences?
Preferences.
Okay. So in there, there's going to be an option for, I think it is mouse or trackpad.
Okay.
They moved it in the new update to this stupid sidebar, and I hate it so much.
Mhm.
I can't even find it anymore. General? There's certainly a way to turn it off. I don't even know what it is anymore. That is going to bother the bejesus out of me until I figure it out now. If you want to just share your screen and I can show you where it is on yours, I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure it out on my own. Because I do know where it is on yours. Apple systems preferences, trackpad, that row, third row down. Yep. And then if you go to point and click, I believe, the tab up at the top. That force click with haptic feedback down at the bottom. You can uncheck that, and now it will not open anything up for you.
Oh, God, thank you. It's been driving me nuts for 3 months.
Well, don't update your operating system because I can't freaking find that option anymore. And it's really annoying me.
I will not. Well, I'll have to at some point. So I copied that whole div and I'm just pasting it down below.
Yes,
So then I can put in the received messages information. Yeah,
you got it.
okay, thank you.
No problem.
Max, I might need a little bit of help here.
Shares freelance work on it together.
Can you see it?
I can.
Okay.
So I think you're probably on the right track. Let me request remote
Definitely.
control.
There's something in the beginning.
So your first message is here, and you've got the end of the row right. This is the class that's controlling whether it's on the left side or the right side.
Okay.
So we're going to pop it off this one, which is going to bring one of your messages to gray and one of them to blue. That's good. That's what we want. Then in our app.css, you've got everything in here, right? So I think the only thing you're missing, no, you have your text end. Oh, here's our problem. We combined a meta tag with the link tag in here.
Here we go.
So this ends here and this starts here.
Okay.
So that would have prevented all of your bootstrap from working.
There we are. Okay. I was thinking that's what the issue was. My eyes just kept jumping over the line. So I was like, I'll get back to this.
Yep. Yeah, we just pasted in here instead of pasting down on its own line.
Okay.
So I think the only thing I did at that point was like I put some margin on the message so the timestamp didn't overlap, and then that was it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Actually, you know what I did? It was this right here. Margin top 5px. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
Max, can you check mine real quick, please?
I sure can. Go for it.
All right. I tweaked it very slightly, but I just want to make sure that
Let's see what's going on there. You've got okay, your call to no, I meant to do this. There we go.
oh, all right, hold on. Okay.
Your call 2 is opening up in here, and then you're putting your call 10 inside your call 2. So that's why it's like all jumbled over here. You tried to put a call 10 inside the call 2.
Okay.
So we got to close that div off here. And your indentation should be your first sign that, hey, this call 10 is really supposed to be out here inside the row, but not inside the call. You also got a problem of your call 10 here, and then you closed it right away. So all of this stuff is supposed to be inside this call 10. So we got to take this div out. And now you see how I'm going indentation wise and saying, hey, this is supposed to be inside my div. So that's going to close out. Now we can read this and say this whole thing is one row because this level of indentation and this level of indentation line up. Now we've got our col2, and there's nothing inside of it, but it's still taking up that space to shove this col10 over. So if we take a look, now we've got my first received, my second received, except this is supposed to be my first sent message. And we can do that by popping that class off of it. So now the only thing is this message is supposed to be blue. This one's supposed to be gray. So if we go to our app.css, we can look at, you've got your timestamp in here. You don't have your user message text. And on that, we can add our background color of gray and our text font color of black. And now I did light gray up here. Now you're all caught up and good to go.
I'm glad I asked because I was getting sure of myself and it was wrong.
Watch yourself in these calls, right? Don't let div soup take control of you. So if you find that putting in these comments like end of row is helpful, put them in for each one of your closing div tags. Because while it's super easy for the computer to keep track of 4 closing div tags on our own, it's not easy for us to keep track of 4 closing div tags. So we really want to be careful in managing those.
All right. Thank you, Max. It's fixed.
No problem. Anyone else need help?
I'd like to ask again, why my other bubble hasn't shown up.
Okay.
So, let's see.
So we just took a div class row and threw it all the way at the bottom of the file. Our div class row has to be inside our messages.
Has to be in this div?
In the messages div, not in the row div.
So I need, what just happened there?
There's a little, okay, that works too.
Oh my God, okay. So I need to be up here with another messages div?
No, it's got to be inside our messages div, but not inside the existing row.
Oh, okay.
All right, so your
to-
your indentation is causing all kinds of problems for you,
Yeah, I have to clean it up.
and we gotta clean that up first.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was
So-
thinking,
I'm just gonna take out what you pasted because this needs to be right before we duplicate anything. So we say, okay, we went in a new div, we went in a level, we're good there. We opened a new div and we've got a col equals 10. Let's fix that and get that as a dash.
oh, thank you.
Okay, that span is now opening here and closing down here. So we got to bring that level over 1.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, now we got inside of our col 10 is our timestamp. So it's still inside this div. We haven't closed this div yet. So that's got to come over. Now our timestamp is up there and has its own closing div. I'm going to bring that down just so we can see what's inside of it properly.
Yeah.
Okay, now this div should be closing out this col and they line up, so I'm good. This div is closing out this row and they line up, so I'm good. So now because of that, because this is all lining up, it's much easier for me to say, hey, I'm taking this whole row and making another row.
Yep.
And from here, I'm going to just pop this off because this is whether the user has sent that message.
That's what I missed. Okay.
So if we save there, we now see we've got our styling right in there. We threw a text end on this one because we wanted it to be at the end of the column. And we
column
also,
2 somewhere.
yes, we put in a col 2 to kind of shove that over. If we come over here, you are all called up and good to go.
Okay, and they're so both supposed to say my first received message.
Oh, we can modify that.
No,
My
I wasn't
first
sure if I'd missed that also.
sent. I don't know if I changed that on my own. I probably didn't. My
Okay.
first sent message. Now I have.
Okay.
And there you go.
Okay, great. Great. Thank you.
No problem. Clyde, go ahead.
Max, I just want to know how to access the browser to see the output.
Yep. In our file, I'm not sharing my screen. In our files over on the left, we're going to right click on package.json and say open an integrated terminal.
Let's get-
And right click, open an integrated terminal. That should open a window down at your bottom.
Yeah, it
And
did.
then you can do npm space start and hit enter. And that should bring up your browser window with your React code.
Yes, it did. Thank you. Thank you,
problem.
Max.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, let's get back to it then. So we've been pretty HTML and CSS heavy here, right? No JavaScript, no functionality yet. We don't even have our bottom input showing. But before we even get to our bottom input, there is a whole lot of code here, right? And as you guys painfully know, when you copied and pasted that, you had to be very surgical, right? You had to know exactly what you were highlighting, what you were copying, what you were pasting. And we have our two messages showing up, but imagine how hard this would be to manage if we had 20 messages or 50 messages showing up. So how do we solve that? What React concept can we use in order to make this code a little bit more reusable?
Component.
Component. We can move all of this into its own component, and then our code is a little bit easier to reuse because we can just call on that component. So what we are going to do is we're going to come down to that final curly brace, right? That is the function up here. We're going to come all the way down to that final curly brace, and we're going to make our own function. So we're going to say const sent message equals our typical function, Again, we use a capital S here because whenever we create our own component, a custom component, we call it with a capital letter. And then we're going to return something. And the return is what's going to come out of this. And then we've got to figure out what this is going to return. Well, this is my sent message, right? So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to click on my div. I already left my comment down here for the end of the row. I can take that whole div, cut it, and paste it as part of my return for my sent message. I'm then going to come back up and I'm going to get my whole received message. And I'm going to cut that. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to make a new const called received message. I got so much crap last year for never spelling received right. I'm trying really hard this year. All right, received message. And that is going to return my other row, which has my received message. So I come over to my browser, I take a look, and my messages are gone. What do I need to do?
Plug the components in.
We do. This is a regular function, right? And what do we know about functions? Functions don't run unless we call that function. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to throw in a sent message and a received message. And come over here and hey, that looks pretty good. And I can come over here and what if I want to be like that paranoid partner who's always messaging you over and over and over again? Okay. Well, that's a starting point, but I don't have any control over my first sent message. This isn't my first sent message anymore. So what React component, other than Brian, what React concept can we use to change this so that every message has its own unique text?
State?
State is where we're going to store the data, but we're not quite at that storage level yet. How can we change our component based off of information sent in when we call the component? It's like an HTML
Spread?
attribute, not a spread operator. That's going to move our array out. What's like an HTML attribute in React?
It's not the JSX, is it?
No, it's going to be a prop. So we get access to our prop just like we get access to parameters. We can say our props are going to come in here. And on our received message, I'm going to add something that says the message text is going to equal my my message, my received message. Well, if I come over to my received message, that doesn't line up with my text up here. What I need to do is come down to my received message and modify what's in that span tag to use my props.text. I'm going to come over here. Now I get my received message. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. I can also modify my sent message to use props. And I can modify the message text in there to use my props. And that's going to get text as well. And then I can come up here, and maybe we don't need all of these messages, but we can say text equals sent number 1 and text equals sent number 2. And when I save that and come over here, I now have my sent number 1, my received message, and my sent number 2. Now pause there because that was some surgical precision there to modify some existing code, but we just componentized our first React code. This is a very common thing. We're writing a lot of code and we go, you know what? We want to be able to reuse this. So what we do is we move it into its own component, and then we modify the props when we call that component in order to be able to customize that message while still being able to reuse a large section of the code. Again, we called our component up here. We added a prop called text and set that prop value to what we wanted to show up. We then made two new functions, one for our received message and one for our sent message. Based off of that, we added in the props that were getting passed in from up here. And then we modified our message text, both in the received message and in the sent message, to display our props.text in the appropriate span.
Do you mind just showing us what your message, your page looks like? Okay, mine does not look like that. Why does it not look like that?
Oh,
I
sorry.
received message.
That's not what I meant to do.
Okay.
That's everything on the screen. Give yourselves a minute to debug if you don't have what it looks like over here. And then if you need help, just raise your hand. This is a time where like you get the concept, right? Like you're moving it into its own code, you're passing some information in, but it can be really tricky to actually get it working, right? So this is a time, take your time here. We won't move on. Give everyone a minute to debug. Exona, go ahead.
I am having, oh, I think. So that's sent message, received message. Sorry, I think I may have found the answer, but text. Nope, that didn't work. Can I share my screen, please?
You sure can.
This is what I have, and this is my code.
Okay. Let
I
me.
received.
So your
Did I not set the ID messages? Yeah, I did.
sent, received, received. Here's our problem. You're returning your sent message. You are
But I'm not
not
returning.
returning your received message.
Okay, sorry. There we go.
Okay. And now styling wise, if we pop this one, nope, I think it's this one out. No, I did it wrong.
It was the other
that one.
way.
I tried.
Okay, perfect.
There you go.
Perfect.
And then the one other thing that's going to bug me until I fix it, that
Is that
exclamation
top?
point, that's probably going to be all the way up in your index.html. You probably have. Oh, no, maybe I'm wrong. It's not in there. So let's go one level deeper and go into your app. Aha. There you go.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem.
Ugh.
Everyone, another minute here. Make sure you're understanding the concept. Make sure you've got all your code in the right place. Anyone need help? No shame in asking for help on this one. Lots of moving parts.
I just have a quick weird comment or question. On line 54, the export default, why is that there? Does it mean that the app has stopped?
Not that the app has stopped, it actually gives all access to index.js, access to the app itself.
Okay,
So we're going to actually practice. So the very next thing we're doing is we're going to practice importing and exporting something. But if you notice, app.js is over here, but index.js is what really imports the app and then uses document get element by ID to attach it into the root that is in our index.html right here.
you're not sharing.
That might help. Okay, our app.js is exported here. When we export so that we're able to import our app right here. So basically, whatever we export in that file is what the import knows it's allowed to access. Then we use the app and use document get element by ID to attach it to the root. Well, get element by ID, we've seen that before. That's coming from our root right here. So what React is really doing is the order of execution is it goes to index.html, it gets an empty root, then it goes to index.js, imports our whole app, makes the app show up, and then takes that and renders it in to our root div that is going to include everything that's exported from here, which includes everything that's getting returned from right here, which uses these components, which we have defined down here.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. Last call for help before we move on here. Anyone need any sections re-explained?
Max, can you just check mine real quick, please?
Go for it.
Thank you.
Okay, so you've got your props in, you've got your components. Scroll down a little bit for me. You've got your props.txt in both of them. You've got styling only applied to one of them. Everything looks right to me there. Switch over to your browser. Yep, you're good to go.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got our messages working. We're going to need to hook in data to that, and we'll deal with that when we get there. The last UI component that we need, the last user interface thing that we need is our message bar down at the bottom. So I'm going to come in here and I'm like, you know what? This is getting really messy for me, right? We've got our received message in here, our sent message in here. I'm about to add in a whole nother thing. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just separate this out and say, you know what? My header is going to be in one file. All of my messages list stuff is going to be in another file. And then finally, my message input is going to be in its own third one. We're already on that track of componentizing out our code. Now we just can take those components that we've defined down here and move them out into their own components in their own files. So I'm going to right click on source, the source folder, and I'm going to create a new file. And we're going to start with our header.js. I am then going to say const header is equal to a new arrow function. And that's going to return. And no, I'm not going to go remake my header. I'm going to go back to my app.js. I'm going to take my whole header section and I'm going to cut it. I'm going to go back to my header.js and paste that sucker in. But what Exona was asking about was, what's this export down here? Well, this export system is telling React what it has access to. What we want to do is say export the default thing out of this file as the header. If we do that, and I'm going to try and split screens here, I can go up to the top and import my header from where? From the header file. And if I do all of that, I should be able to add in my header like we add in any other component. And if you look over here, we've got my messages. We've got 10 lines of code now no longer plugging up our app.js. We've got this nice one-liner for our header component, and we don't need to worry about things getting messy and having multiple lines and divs. We're able to move that out all into its own file. Give everyone a
Erase it
minute.
from the app.js.
Yes. As long as you have it in your header.js, you can delete it from over here in your app.js. If you don't, you'll just have two headers. All right, we're going to get even more practice with that. I don't want all of my messages to show up in my app.js. I want my app.js to be as clean and as minimalist as possible. So I'm going to practice that again. I'm going to right click. I'm going to new my new file, and I'm going to call this messages list.js. Right? And I'm being very careful on my plural there, because I have multiple messages that show up in this list. So I'm going to call it messages list, not just message list. From there, I am going to take not only my div ID messages, I have to create my messages list function, return out my div ID messages, but now sent message and received message is in this messages list file. And it's like, what the hell is a sent message? I don't know what that is. Well, we've got to take our components, our received message and sent message component, and move that over to our messages list as well.
Okay, can we back up?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, because that made me dizzy. So we're in our app.js.
We
We're
create a
doing the-
new file called messageslist.js.
So
We-
in public,
No, in source. Nothing goes in public. No React code goes in public.
oh, okay, I forgot. that part. So
And it's just off. We just need to add our export
messages.
default messages list. You can import it over here and use it in here. Pause in there. I'm starting to pull and I'm coming to you next, Artro. You want to look at what's now in app and what's now in messages list. Compare those two, and what you'll be able to do is, based off of what is in messages list, you'll be able to see what is coming from app to end up over in messages list. Artro, you want to share your screen?
I got it catching up to do, but
Okay.
reason why I raised my hand is I needed help creating that new file, but Jennifer took
Yep.
care of that.
Right click on the SRC folder and then new file from there.
That's where I was messing up. All right, thank you.
So app.js only has 14 lines now.
Yes. And the reason why I don't do this from the get-go, the reason why I don't just create new files and say, hey, let's create this code where it's going to end up living, is that's not how we write code, right? When we write code, we start out naively thinking that this is only going to be a couple lines, and then we get to the end of it and you're like, I would be embarrassed to show this to someone, right? And so what we do is we go through, and this process that we're practicing right now is called refactoring our code, right? We're going through and cleaning it up so that we can, when we show this to someone, we can say, hey, my entire project is just these 3 components, right? It's my header, it's my message list, it's my message input. But from there, imagine if a client came back to you and said, I hate the blue message, I want to turn that to a nice fuchsia. Well, you could open up your app.js and go, well, the message is going to be in the messages list. So you can open that file, and then you can go, oh, look, my received message is right here. I can go through and modify the styling on that. So that's why we take the time, even though it's a large chunk of app that we move into messages list. It's a very common practice to get done writing our React code and then go, oh, crap, we got to refactor this so it's more componentized, right? So we've got more chunks of it so it's easier to read. Brian, go ahead.
All right, this might be simplifying it too much, so correct me if I'm wrong, but just trying to think like big picture. Is the ideal ending is that like your app should basically be like all components, and like pretty much everything that you can like look like actual HTML, you should do like in another file so that the app is like as clean as
it depends,
possible.
Right? So like our to-do list app was a small enough app where we didn't need extra components. We didn't need to make our own components. The cut and dry answer is we make a new component whenever we want to reuse that component. But that's not what's happening here. We needed to reuse these components, so we made them. But then why did we move this out into its own component? And the answer there is the human brain understands 10 files with 100 lines in it much more than it understands one file with 1,000 lines in it. So we can take advantage of not only components, but the import-export system, which are called ES6 modules. We're able to take advantage of that to separate our code out. So it is probably an overstatement to say we don't want any HTML in our app. But in general, yes, we want to break things out into smaller files, but there's a limit on that, right? I've seen people create like 2 or 3 line components. And I'm like, come on, man, you're not reusing that anywhere. Like, just throw that in app and call it a day, right? So it really depends. And I could show this code to a React developer and they could look at this and say, this is hideous. Received message and sent message should be its own file. Some people follow the thinking of, yeah, you know what? Every component should be its own file. Some developers go, well, no, it kind of all makes sense, right? You've got those components that are used in your message list. Keep all of those components together. So it really depends on not only your own style as a developer, but also what your company standards have, right? So the company I work at has a style guide, and we go through and it's kind of like, do you use the Oxford comma? Do you not use the Oxford comma? For us, it's do you use tabs or do you use spaces? You know, what are the rules that kind of make us cringe when we read that in our code? And that's what we try and abide by in our code. Albert,
Got it.
go ahead.
Explains it perfectly. Thank you.
I just have a quick question. Did I miss a step where we link the CSS, or is the CSS supposed to be linked automatically?
CSS is in app.css and will apply to everything in the app. So the CSS that you had written already should still be applying in messages list.
I got my messages. I don't have the bubbles or the blue or the gray.
Share your screen. Let's take a look.
Did you delete your CSS, Elba?
No. So,
So go to your app.js. Okay, that looks right there. Go to your app.css. And go to the bottom of that file. I think I saw red on 21, which makes me nervous. Why do you have red on 21? Scroll up a little bit. All right, you've got me confused. What is it mad about?
it's an arrow, it's not like a squiggly line, like it gives an error, it's just an arrow going sideways. I have no idea.
Did it just not like your empty line? Yeah, that was it. It just didn't like the fact that you had an extra line there.
All right.
The other thing I noticed is, let me confirm this theory. I go to your messages list and just change this. Oh no, it is auto refreshing. Sometimes, and this is good for everyone to hear, you're like, why is this not updating? Sometimes you do need to manually refresh in the browser, or if that doesn't do it, you can come back over to your terminal and hit Control-C to stop it, and then up enter to restart it. Sometimes that like clears some crud out of the line and, you know, gets everything working again. So you may have had a mistake in your CSS that caused the live reload to stop working. And then when you fixed it, the live reload just wasn't showing the fix for that.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
So Max, I don't understand why it's giving me compiled with problems.
Okay.
Like modules aren't found in something.
Share screen, let's take a look.
What happened?
Okay, so
Yes.
we are going to break this down. It says cannot find header.js does not match header.js. What does that error message mean to you?
There's I have a capital.
Mm-hmm.
Where?
So the file name should have a capital H because header has the capital H.
Even though it's a lowercase h in my editors.
You should rename the file to be a capital H.
Okay.
Now, the other problem here is saying messages list cannot, oh, okay. So you fix that one. Now this one is saying it can't find messages list inside the source folder. So is your messages list.js inside your source folder?
I think so. Let me pull it over. Messages.list source folder.
Nope.
Yes?
That
No?
says messages.list. Where have we ever used a .list file before?
Oh, messages list.
.js. Yep. And make sure you get your capital L in there as well.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Max,
Mhm.
it's broken.
Go ahead, share your screen. That's why we're
All
here.
right. All right.
Trust me, I know how painful it is to refactor, but it's a very important skill, which is why we spend the time in class getting that practice. You're sharing your window with Slack.
I am.
Mhm.
All right. Let me do that again. That's the frustration setting in.
All right, now we're on the right one. So
All right.
what it's saying is, hey, I am trying to import something called messages list. If
Right, from
you
the app.js.
could, yes, if you
Okay,
could
so I'm
give
on
me remote access, it's
I'm
probably
sorry.
on your other.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so you're importing it here, and that's right. The problem is it's going to messages list, and it's saying, okay, I've got messages list and I've got a received message in here. What are you trying to import? We've got to tell it what we're exporting from this file. So what we're going to do is down here at the bottom, we're going to export our messages list from this file. So in our app.js, it can import in the app. So now we've got a different problem that says export default imported as app was not found in app. It's a terrible way of saying the module has no exports, right? What we had in here and may have not nicked by accident was we've got to export our app so that index.js can import it from here.
Okay.
All right, we're getting there. Now it's like, what the heck is a sent message? It's telling us in messages list on line 4, it doesn't know what a sent message is. So we're going to go into our messages list, and what you have in here is your messages and a received message and your received message. And then it's like, what's a sent message?
Okay.
At some point, we lost that when we were moving from app.js. So what I'm going to do is totally cheat and go to my sent message. And just borrow this whole thing and drop it into yours. And now you are back in business.
Thank you, Max.
No problem. The reason why we spend time debugging and not just dropping you into a breakout room with a TA is because everyone can benefit from that debugging, right? Because chances are, if you didn't get that error message now, you're going to get that error message somewhere down the line. So it's not just a matter of, oh, I got an error, I need to fix the error. It's a matter of saying, do I understand what this error message is saying? Because for whatever reason, developers are terrible at writing error messages, right? And so it's a matter of deciphering them out, understanding what the computer is telling us is wrong. That's the much more important skill than actually being able to say, hey, it's working, it's all good to go, right? And that's how we grade your homework assignments as well. Your homework assignment, it doesn't need to be super pretty. What we grade your homework assignment on is, did you prove that you understood this, right? You may not have it perfect. It may not be working exactly the way you want, but does your assignment show that you have understanding? That's not something that most schooling does, right? Most schooling is you get a 0 through 100 and whatever you got. We are looking for that level of understanding, which is why we have a scaled back meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, below expectations. We're looking for that understanding. Does anyone else need help? We are almost at the finish line here. I want one more component to be done, and we can call it a day and dive into functionality tomorrow. Good for the final push? Any last questions? Okay. So I'm going to close out of both my messages list and my header. I'm done with them. And just like your web browser, you can be swimming in tabs and get lost in your files, right? So we want to practice good code hygiene. We're going to close out everything that we're not using. I'm not using my index. I just want my app open. I'm going to make one more file, and I'm going to call that message input input.js.
Can you share your screen?
I swear I should have like a swear jar of every time I'm not swearing, every time I'm not sharing my screen. I can just throw something in. Okay. I've got my message input.js file. I created that by right clicking, hitting new file, calling that message input.js. File extensions are important here. So is the casing, right? Capital M because it's our own component, capital I, so it's a new word. From there, I'm going to do my const message input equals a new function. For now, I'm just going to put a little placeholder in here, right? So I'm going to say return a div that just has placeholder in it. Now, because we need to import this from another file, we need to export it. And if we have it exported, that means over in our app.js, we can import our message input and then call our message input function component. Functional component. It's both a function and a component. And if that is working, we should have placeholder showing up. Not positioned right, nowhere near in the right spot. That's okay. We're just going to start with our placeholder. End result that we're looking for is just the word placeholder showing up underneath our messages.
Sorry, I'm getting an error. JS, why did I put message? Oh, just kidding. I found it.
Okay. Back to sharing my screen then.
What's your screen look like right now, please?
And again, what we're doing, this is a good time to probably get a little bit more visual, right? We have our message input that is returning out our div placeholder. That message input gets linked into our export right here. That export is used right over here. And our message input is coming from our message input.js over here. And then this message input gets used as our own component right here. Anyone need help?
I'm running into that same stupid error. I'm looking at it, trying to compare them. I had to move my message input.js into my source folder because I accidentally somehow put it in the public.
Okay.
So I fixed that part, but I am not seeing my placeholder.
Go ahead, share your screen. Let's take a look.
Of course, I can't see it. Do I just need to refresh?
Let me see your code. Okay, you got your message input. Let's go. What's going on in your app? You have imported it, but where do you call it?
Oh, I don't call it. Okay. That's supposed to go. Just import.
And be careful there. We aren't inputting multiple. Yep, you got it.
I'm sorry, Max. Having a
You're
hard
fine.
Okay, fixed.
Like I said, you probably are not the only one to make that mistake. And so someone else seeing it may get them unstuck.
Cool. Thank you.
No
It's a
problem.
lot.
Yeah.
It's sorry, it's a lot of steps to kind of like remember, but hopefully with practice we can remember, you know, we have to do this after that, then this step. So
Yes.
that was my problem too. But
It's the way that most training happens is it says you do step 1, 2, and 3, and if you do step 1, 2, and 3 in order, you always get that output, right? And it's like, okay, but we're doing so many steps here that we can't keep steps 1 through 40 in our head. So it's more for me thinking about, all right, instead of individual steps here, what is our main objective? We're trying to take code in app and throw it in its own file, right? So instead of thinking about all 30 steps all at once, say, all right, what do I have to do here? I don't care about what step 2 is until I get step 1 done, right? Let me think about step 1, create the file. Okay, now the file's got to be able to like spit code out, right? So we're going to make our function to do that. Okay, now what's it trying to spit out? All right, I'm going to go steal that code from whatever I have, move it into there. Okay, now that it's spitting that out, I need to tell it, hey, I would like you to spit, right? I would like you to use this. So I need to export out the file so that when I go into my app.js, I can import in that file. Okay, now that I've pulled that in, where do I want it to show up? Okay, I'm going to go put my component in, and now I'm good to go. So when you think about it as it took 5 minutes to do all of that, and there are 14 steps to get that all done, you're going to get overwhelmed by the 14 steps. But if you think about it as what makes sense here, right? I can't move stuff into a new file until I've made the file. I can't get anything out of the file unless I tell it what's supposed to be in the file. I can't have that come out the way I want unless I move that code over, right? When you go step by step and not thinking about all 14 steps, it becomes much easier to do each one of them. And then retrospectively, of course, with hindsight, it looks easy, right? I got it done. That all makes sense. But sometimes you get overwhelmed by the number of steps and need to narrow in. And that's what a good engineer does, right? A good engineer is saying, hey, this is what the finished product is going to be. But engineering that product together means focusing only on the step that we're at. Archel, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's broken. I'm trying to do the errors. I'm trying to follow the line and making sure things are spelled correctly, and I'm just not seeing it.
Share your screen, let's take a look.
All right.
Okay, it cannot find a file called .message input in app.js line 7. So I'm going to go to app.js line 7, and it is struggling on, it is throwing you off. That is not the line it cares about. The error message is on cannot resolve message input. What is different from message input from messages list?
Right here?
Other than
Okay.
obviously the name of the file.
Well, they both have the quotes. They have the // finally. Thank you
Mm-hmm.
for okay. I was reading that thing like you got the magic touch. Thank you.
No problem.
All right.
Believe it or
And
not,
for what
millions
it's
of
worth,
go for it.
I was just gonna quickly throw in, like, for what it's worth, like in my experience, VS Code is really good at auto completing file extensions if you like start out with the right thing. So I would put a lot of trust in that.
Very good tip. Yes. And you'll see oftentimes if you're paying close attention to my screen share, I get the file name started. And then one skill, if you don't have it, it's definitely something to build up. Being able to type while looking at the screen. Some people call that touch typing. I don't actually do touch typing. I don't use the home row, but I don't look at my keyboard when I type. And while that sounds like a basic, like, yeah, of course, that's going to make you more efficient. What it allows you to do is see that autocomplete on the screen and see, hey, that autocomplete is something that is trying to help me. And as a beginner developer, it's very annoying because you're like, get out of the way. I know what Max typed. I'm trying to type what Max typed. But when you start leaning into them, it does become much harder to get that file name wrong because it's automatically completing it in for you. It's a great tip. All right, we're so close. We've got our div set up. Let's get an input in. Let's get our button in, and let's call it a day. No more React, no more refactoring, just a little HTML, a dash of CSS, and we've got it. So I'm going to delete out my placeholder, and inside my div, I'm going to start by putting a class name on that of row. And I'm also going to put a class on there called input bar because I've got a feeling I'm going to need to style that. Inside of there, I got a row. I want to split it. So I've got a class name col10. And my input's going to go in there. So I'm just going to leave a note for myself input. But oftentimes when I'm doing my grid and my layout, I get my whole layout working first before I start putting things into it. That makes it easier for me to say, well, if this div is closing out this row, I must need another div in here for my next column. And that's going to be a col2. And inside here is going to go my button. Okay, it's easy enough. Now I should be able to do that. So I put my input in here. It's going to be a type of text. I'm going to put a class name on there of form-control. That's Bootstrap zhuzhing things up for us a little bit, adding some styling on there for us. And that's all I need for now. And in my col2, I am going to put a button. And I'm going to use Bootstrap again for that. I'm going to put a BTN and a BTN success on it. And I am going to close that out and just put the word send in there. And I pop over here and I've got my input and I've got my send. That's looking really, really good. I'm happy with all of that. The only thing that I hate that this should be anchored down at the bottom of the screen, right? I want all of my messages to kind of push down what my input bar is doing there. So I've got a little complicated CSS that's a one-liner, but we're out of CSS 101 anymore, right? We've got our basics down. We've been doing basics so far. We've got it styled out the way we want. The last thing we are going to do is get a little fancy on our messages div. On our messages div, we are going to set the height of that div. Again, the goal here is to take this and push it down. Have that messages list take up enough space that my entire bar at the bottom is going to be pushed down. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to calculate the height of my messages input to take 100% of the vertical height of the window and subtract out 140 pixels. Well, where do I get 140 from? That is the height of my header at the top plus the height of my input bar down at the bottom. So whatever the height of this is plus whatever the height of this is, take those two numbers, that adds up to 140, then take the 100% of the height of the screen, take the 140 out, and that must be the correct height for in here. That's it. That's all I have for you. I am done frying your brains. You've got one more day until you are off. Give everyone a minute here. Make sure no one has questions. We'll switch over to vocab and we'll call it a night.
I just have a question. Can you explain that hide calc again? Sorry.
Yeah.
I was typing.
You're fine. So the messages, our goal here is basically to say, like, this area of the screen, we want this whole area to be a certain height to push our input bar down to the bottom.
Okay.
So what we do is we go, well, how do we figure out what the height of this is supposed to be? I don't quite want it to be 100% of the height of the screen, because if it was, it wouldn't leave any message, any room for the bar at the bottom or for the header at the top. So what we do is we figure out that the height of the header and the height of the input bar combined is about 140 pixels.
Okay.
So we say take 100% of the height of the screen, leave a little room at the bottom for the input and for the header at the top, and that's what the height of our messages list is going to be.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And just I have one question about like the arithmetic involved in the minus 100 view height. Like say I use some other metric to like size, like say I use like rims or like you know, just some random size. Could I like, so say the header was pixels, I'm judging that by pixels, and like the footer was rims. Could I say like 100 VH minus whatever the amount of pixels were minus the amount of rims? Or
You can. Calc is very, very fickle. Most CSS is pretty flexible. So like if you get the border properties wrong and you do like you do solid gray 1px, the border is still going to know like what you mean there, even though it's not in the right exact order. Calcs are not like that at all. Calcs are just like file paths, and like if you do this,
It's not gonna work.
it's like, nope, not spaced out right. Your height can go to hell. And you're like, oh, come on. And you're literally going to throw a fit over a space. So normally spacing doesn't matter in our code. Normally CSS is quite flexible and will overlook a forgotten semicolon or whatever. But with calcs, it is very, very specific. So if you wanted to, like I could say minus 300 pics here and it would shrink it up. But you have to be very careful on your spacing, both of the arithmetic operator and of the unit.
got it, thank you.
But yes, the unit can be, you can cross-reference. That's the power of using a calc, is that you can use any CSS unit inside of them. The only thing you can't do is get JavaScripty with it and say like, minus the height of the header, minus the height of, right? Like you can't dynamically say, based off of this other element, figure out what the height of that is and then subtract that out. You have to kind of hard code it for the height of that.
Got it.
And I'm sure there are better ways of doing it, but you have maxed out the CSS wizardry that I know. You are out of your first year of Hogwarts. Go elsewhere if you would like more CSS experience.
Face the CSS dementors.
Yeah. Time to figure out Patronuses on your own. That's above my pay grade. Last call for help before we do some terms. Can't say I haven't fried your brains pretty good. See, Ryan gave you a little wiggle room. Sometimes classes ended early with Ryan. Never happens with me. Always right up to that last minute. You say 6 months, I make you work all 6 months. All right, let's pull up the outline. These are a little outdated because we're going at a faster clip than initially anticipated. So I will get these reflected, and I will also get tonight's video uploaded along with last night's pretty quickly. So they will both be available by tomorrow morning. With all of that said, what did we learn terms-wise tonight?
Import and export.
Import and export. This is, to get technical with you, that import and export system is called the ES6 module system. The other system that we use is called CommonJS. Same exact goal, except it uses the require syntax. Where have we seen require syntax before? Going all the way back to Node, right? When we were working in the terminal, we had to require some packages in, right? The entire industry, the entire JavaScript industry is currently in the middle of migrating everything over from the CommonJS module system, that's your require syntax, over to the ES6 module system, which is import and export. So if you see them, they achieve the same thing. We needed CommonJS because importing and exporting wasn't built into the language itself. And then JavaScript came up with an update in ES6 that built the module system in. So very long story on import export. We'll see a little bit more of that when we get over into Node. We'll go over an exercise of importing and exporting things out. But I'm going to say used by React to allow access to components created in separate files. It's used for a lot more than that, but for right now, that's how we're using it. What else?
Did we do prop text already?
We can say props. A way to pass information from the place we use, call the functional component, down into the component itself. I just want to touch on that one quickly. We happen to do props.text in our messages list. Okay, that's just not going to open for me. That's fine. We can make the prop whatever we want, right? So if we wanted to add another prop on here called timestamp, we could pass some information in there and then just say props.timestamp down here. In fact, we'll be doing that in a second. We'll be doing that tomorrow, I mean. But the whatever prop name we use here, as long as it lines up with the prop name down here, we can pass any number of props that we want. What else? Have we defined refactoring before? Process of revising our code so that it is easier to understand and sometimes faster.
Maybe touch on like the difference between the public and the source
Sure.
folders.
In React, the static part of our app includes index.html, which is the I'll say container for lack of a better word for our React code, and then our src folder, short for source, the folder that holds not only all of our JSX React code, but also our CSS. Most files are created in here. When you guys get to your capstone, you might want to unlock that public folder a little bit. The public folder makes it a little bit easier for us to pull in images in different ways. But for now, you can think of this as, hey, don't really want to touch the public folder much. Maybe I throw Bootstrap in that index.html, but everything else goes into source. Last call for any terms. Before I let you go back to your tab. Look at what we created tonight. Not only did we build out this entire interface with our sent messages and all of our CSS, created this from scratch, and not only did we create all of this, we refactored all of this. So we were able to say, hey, when I go in here, look at how clean my app is. This is just a couple lines of code. And from here, I can very distinctly look at this code and say, if I need to edit any part of it, I know exactly what to go to. And if I go into my messages list, I can look at this and understand exactly what's going on there and understand what comes out for each one of those components. That's a major accomplishment, because if you remember when we got started, how many different divs did we have? I think we were up to 5 or 6 nested divs. Now looking at this, yeah, sometimes we need to get in div-wise, but man, is this a whole heck of a lot easier to read of, you know what, I've got my div for my app, and I got 3 components in it. And inside of that, I go into my messages list, 1 div, more components in there. This code isn't easy to refactor. It's a whole heck of a lot of steps, but important at the end of the night, 5 o'clock rolls around or whatever your quitting time normally is, before you shut down that computer, take a look at what you've created and don't get frustrated about what work you still have to do on it. Be proud of what you've built. Built this from scratch, all of our own CSS. We built this all in one day, and it's really functional, readable code. Tomorrow, we get into the fun stuff of React and interactivity and state and data and all of that. More props headed your way, more use state, even a little bit more of refactoring, which I'm sure you guys will love, but more practice on that. Until then.
Hey, Matt, you said
Yep.
you were gonna go over homework?
Thank you. I most certainly did. Homework is live in Canvas. Really appreciate the reminder. I thought I was actually going to get you guys out of here 2 minutes early. Week 13 homework. We are going to put chat app aside tomorrow. Don't worry, it will rear its ugly head again. We're going back to-do list for homework. You're going to take what we've done in class, and I will upload a link here if you need starter code if you didn't follow along in class. But what you're going to do is add a done button for each task in the to-do app. And what you want to do is make it so when you hit the done button, it shows that task item as crossed off. That's the assignment. However, it is a lot of freaking code you got to modify to make that work. So if you get stuck on any of that, here are some hints to get that working. Anyone have questions about the assignment itself? As always, if you get stuck on these, all of our TAs can help you with React code. Feel free to schedule one-on-ones or hit us up in Slack. Oftentimes we can help you guys asynchronously. And I know I've said it before, I'll say it again. My Calendly is blocked out for next week, but that does not mean I am unavailable. So shoot me a Slack message and we can find a time that works for both of us. I know it's the holiday week. I know it's busy. But if you need help, we're here for you. Assignments get tougher, but they get more important because we're integrating more concepts directly into hands-on. Guardrails are off, go at it. This is not due, by the way. It's not due on Sunday because I'm not a Grinch. This is not due until the Monday or Tuesday that we get back.
So the 3rd.
The 3rd at 5:30.
Okay.
All right. You guys have an awesome evening. I'll stick around for another minute or two in case anyone has questions. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow.
All right,
Uh,
good night.
Just a quick question. Is there any chance by any chance do you have free time the 30th? I am free all day. I took it off from work. So
When am I flying back? I will most likely have oh no, I'm on the wrong. Yeah, I will most likely have some availability then. Let me check in with my family and then I'll shoot you a message on Monday of what my availability will look like on that.
perfect. Sounds great. Thank you so much.
And if you don't hear back from me on Monday, shoot me a message.
Okay, we'll do. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good one.
You too.
See you guys.